Good morning. Have a couple of announcements we want to go over as we get started. First off, this morning, hopefully, we'll have a short business meeting. I'm hoping that everybody was able to get all the reading and considerations accomplished ahead of time, and we can go quickly through the agenda items and move on. And so that'll be the plan for here this morning after the morning service. And then here in a couple of weeks, May 16th, we have Brent Savinsky here, Lord willing, and he'll be preaching twice that day at the 10:30 service, right at this time frame, and then back again at 3. We encourage you, we invite you to come back at 3. Obviously, for one, to hear Brent again. For two, kind of as an acknowledgement of my daughter's graduation. For 3, when we scheduled this back whenever, about a good over a year ago, we were excited to have the date the middle of the month because a lot of their friends and people that they work with and whatnot, they knew would be going to the school's graduation. Well, for whatever reason, the school's graduations are now all a week earlier than normal and literally at the same time. And so it was interesting how that all worked out. Was it the Stark County and Princeville are both at 3 o'clock on that Sunday. And so the whole slew of people that they thought might be able to come and be a part of their service will not be here. And so we're hoping that you will be for that. So that'll be May 16th, just a couple weeks away. And looking forward to that. Probably not as much as the girls are and being done with their high school, but it's coming here very shortly as well. Other than that, I don't think we have anything else immediate. A few things that we'll discuss obviously not this afternoon, hopefully before this afternoon in the business meeting. But I think that is it. As far as some prayer requests, I don't know that we had really any updates there as well here this last week. Continue to pray for Lori, obviously, and the girls' Peru mission trip and all the details around that. But any updates?
We took it off because Lucas got back yesterday. I don't know anything about stay safe for your return.
Yes. Anybody else?
Honestly, Ava is like, we have leukemia's gone, but right now she's going through some serious testing.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
listed exactly what's happening. I can't remember what right now is, but
Yes. Anybody else? All right, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you again for your goodness. We thank you for even just the answered prayer in regards to safety of the group that went to Tennessee and their return as well. And I do pray so you certainly continue to be with Ava and just the road that she has yet ahead. Continuing on in these good 100 days that she'll be in the hospital. I pray that you continue to give her the strength, the health that is necessary, certainly the patience that will be necessary. And I just pray that you would continue to do a work in her heart, that she has opportunity to be a testimony for you, even while she's there in the nursing home, or in the hospital. And I pray that as well that you be with Lori, and certainly the loss of her husband, and just the adjustment of that's involved, and although I don't know all the details, certainly just the consideration of the farm and all that's involved. And as we hit the planting season, I just pray that you would work out all those details and just that you would coordinate friends and family, that they'd just be able to surround her and get all the specifics accomplished as needed. And we thank you that you're a God that you certainly are aware of all those details. You're aware of the solution to all those details as well, and we thank you certainly for that. For the other requests certainly that are on our hearts, the other requests certainly on our list that we've been praying for quite some time, I just pray that you would guide us, guide those that are going through this, that we would be able to see your leading, see your presence, be able to follow after you, and even continue to be a testimony for you as we continue to bear under the burden, under the trial, under the circumstance that you've placed us through, that we might be able to understand the goodness that you are doing in and through us, even in the midst of tragedy, in the midst of those situations that aren't often as desirable as we would like, but we give you the glory for them. And I just pray that you be with our time together here this morning, that you unite our hearts, that you would excite us about what you are doing, and then to challenge us as well through your word. And I pray that we be able to say it truly has been good to be in your house today. We thank you for that in Jesus' name. Amen. This time we have special music. Very good. May we be that example in following Christ. I have an excuse. I can say it this way. I have an excuse this morning if my words are backwards and forwards and sometimes upside down. I say this humorously because normally I don't have an excuse. It just happens. This time I have an excuse for it. A couple weeks ago, my daughters on their vehicle, their brakes started grinding horribly, and I was right in the middle of that time frame of the overlap of classes. So all the projects are being due while I'm also in the middle of the next class. And I told them, I said, I can't get to this to change the brakes, to fix the brakes, but they can take it into Kewanee. And I said, but the warning is that obviously they're going to get charged for labor. And if there is anything else that is wrong, they will find it and they will charge you to fix it. And obviously, a bill that may wind up starting up at $100 could easily escalate quite rapidly, fixing other things that they'll find in the process. Well, they voted to have Dad fix it, and so yesterday we replaced the brake pads, and then one of the calipers was not seeming to function very well, so we wanted to replace the caliper as well. Both calipers in the front. And if you've ever worked on brakes, those bolts can sometimes be really tight. And at Cherry Tree days, I'd have those that would, I'd be out there struggling. I'd go into one of the guys that works there. His name was Joe, but not that Joe. And I just have to say something like, I bet you can't break this bolt loose. He'd walk out there and grunt and groan, and he'd do it. He'd break it. So, but I always hated to admit that I couldn't and he could. So that was always a very last resort. But I didn't have a Joe in my garage yesterday. So I got this big breaker bar, and I'm pushing down with all my might. Well, the thing broke loose, and my head went whack right on the fender of their vehicle. It was stars, yeah. You had little birdies flying. But hey, I got it without Keyser. Joe Keyser I did not need him. No.
I know what's wrong with him now.
It's true. You do that too many times, and there are the excuses are right there. It's plain and simple. So if for this week, it may not be any different than last week, but for this week, I will say I have an excuse in that regard. Well, we want to look here as we continue on in Numbers chapter 22, finishing up the last several verses of chapter 22. In fact, it's probably not a passage that is often probably preached from, because in a simple reading you'd say, well, there isn't really much here. But I think there's a lot that can be applied to us as we consider our thinking here in 2021. And we want to look at the aspect of thinking order or orderliness. And it kind of goes along with submission last week, but yet a kind of a broader term. We're going to be in Numbers chapter 22. We will start in verse 36 and go to the end of the chapter. I'll read these verses, and then we'll start with the word of prayer. It says in verse 36, when Balak heard that Balaam was come, he went out to meet him unto the city of Moab, which is in the border of Arnon, which is in the utmost coast. And Balak said unto Balaam, did I not earnestly send unto thee to call thee? Wherefore camest thou not unto me? Am I not able indeed to promote thee to honor? And Balaam said unto Balak, lo, I am come unto thee. Have I now any power at all to say anything? The word that God putteth in my mouth, that shall I speak. And Balaam went with Balak, and they came unto that place. It actually means the city of streets, so we would assume a large city. And Balak offered oxen and sheep, and sent to Balaam and to the princes that were with him. And it came to pass on the morrow that Balak took Balaam and brought him up into the high places of Baal, that hence he might see the utmost part of the people. And before we dive into those verses, let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you again for your word. Thank you for these few verses. I pray that the application of these verses would be clear. Again, that you allow me to decrease, that you alone would increase, that we be able to point our steps in the right direction and continue moving forward for you. I pray that we would consider order in our own hearts and our own lives. I pray that we'd be able to follow after your order, and at times avoid the hastiness at times that gets us into chaos that we so often perhaps find ourselves in. And I just pray that you be with our time together here as we look at your word. In Jesus' name, amen. For 105 years, from 1888 to 1993, as it was called, Big Book was nearly a family staple. Unfortunately, the Big Book was not the Bible, but rather the Sears catalog. In 1993, the Big Book was retired, but every generation alive at that time certainly knew well of that thick Sears catalog. Certainly not my intention to have a sales and marketing a little lesson here this morning, but it certainly could be said that Richard Sears definitely was thinking beyond his years when he first started a mailer in 1888, to advertise his watches and jewelry. What made the catalog work for 105 years? Certainly we could say it was the ingenuity of a man who was in the right place at the right time. Certainly we could say it was a line of products that obviously sold and people were interested in. And history definitely supports both of those, but I believe that there were also many other things that happened to allow what would become the Big Book to be so successful, in fact, grow from just a mailer to a big book. Certainly the Homestead Act of 1862, again, the Big Book started in 1888, so 1862. The Homestead Act, which gave away 160 million acres of land to 1.6 million homesteaders, certainly provided the means by which a catalog, a mailer, would be useful for those who were leaving the cities and leaving their homes and heading west. Certainly as well, though, in conjunction with that, the westward expansion would provide a whole area of land where the commerce had not kept up with the amount of people that were arriving. And so having something that could be ordered and shipped to them was certainly something of great convenience. The establishment of the postal system in 1860, so just not too many decades before this, certainly was a great convenience. Without it, it would not have worked at all. Beginning in 1896, just a few years after the catalog started, they began having free rural delivery from the post office. And then as well, there was a committed customer base, certainly when they first started. Sears, what would you call that? Their motto was, "We can't lose a single customer." And that's really how they orchestrated their business. It could be said then that by 1896, as the contents in the catalog continued to grow, that certainly helped as well. They went from watches and jewelry to include things like sewing machines, sporting goods, musical instruments, saddles, firearms. Imagine buying a firearm from a Sears catalog. Buggies, bicycles, baby carriages, and men and children's clothing. I guess the ladies, you were just out on your own there, where they sold men's and ladies' clothing. And even at times they would have special catalogs that included groceries, and I kid you not, pianos and organs. I don't know how that all worked in the Wild Wild West, or if it was just based out of the Chicago time frame. Rumor has it, and I was not able to verify this, but I found this in a couple places. You know, if it's on the internet, it's got to be true. But I found it in several places that rumor has it that the initial response of these little mailers that he sent out brought in so many orders that old Richard Sears got so far behind that he would literally start using the order forms to heat his building. He could not keep up. We're just going to take these. We're going to use these for heat because I can't get to those anyway. And that's the rumor. I don't know if that is truly the case. But he soon obviously teamed up with Alva Roebuck, and then teamed up with Julius Rosenwald, who seemed to be the guy that made it all work, if I could figure out how to say that correctly. The Sears catalog, the Sears company, ironically now seemingly back to only catalog or online business instead of no stores. But they're not alone in the history of businesses that achieved much, but it wasn't just because of one person. It was this legislation, this time frame, this community, it was this leadership, whatever it was. There are so many pillars that took place at the same time in order to make this work. And yet it's hard as humans at times to admit that our successes maybe is a result of others and not just us, not just ourselves. Certainly we have all heard of the proverbial turtle on a fence post, and realizing that there's no way that turtle got there on its own power, and there's nothing that the turtle doesn't know what he's doing up there, doesn't know how to get down, and certainly someone or something else was complete control to get that turtle where it was. I'm certain we've all heard how we arrived here in Toulon. Honestly, you could blame Bob and mutual missionaries that this church and their church had, and how that all worked together. And I remember the first time that we visited here some 19 plus years ago, sat about where Sam is right now. There were just a few more pews behind us at that point. And we arrived unannounced, so they didn't know I was coming. They didn't know that, so I wasn't going to preach. We were just sitting and watching. And Mrs. Lynn, I believe, was playing an organ we had over here, and they had no piano player, so it was just organ music. Now, I know a lot of churches only have organ music, but in my opinion, it's kind of hard to sing when it's only an organ. And so I made a comment before the service or something that, hey, my wife can play the piano. And we've done that a few times. We've actually been on vacation a few times. We visited a church we've never been to before, and there's no piano player, and I'll walk back to the back and say to the usher, hey, my wife is a Maranatha Baptist Bible College graduate in music. She can play the piano if you'd like. And there's been times that the usher, in the middle of a song, has run down the aisle, Pastor, wait, we got a piano player. Oh, the things that I get my wife into. Well, anyway, that was the scenario of our first trip here. She wound up at the piano, and Mrs. Lynn was at the organ, and the two of them played. And I recall and I've said this before, after that Sunday there, obviously I did not preach, but I was invited to come back to preach the next Sunday, and was told, if I can preach half as good as she can play, the job is mine. And so for 19 years here I have been on that fence post. It's a little turtle kicking its legs. You know, we all have those instances at times in our life where this isn't just us. This is not us. This is God. This is something much bigger than us doing things that many times it's hard for us to admit, because to admit would have to acknowledge His order, His time, His way, not mine. And I think there's some verses here in this last part of this chapter 22 that perhaps will get us to slow down at times. Perhaps at times will get us to reconsider what God is doing and not just what we think we are doing. And so as we dive in, going back to verse 36, and I have a little picture of a turtle on the fence post there just to remind us throughout the service. Thinking order. We want to, I could say it this way, we want to avoid these three things. An eager response here in verse 36. And when Balak heard that Balaam was come, he went out to meet him unto a city of Moab, which is in the border of Arnon, which is in the utmost coast. Clearly, King Balak has gotten word that Balaam and his now talking donkey is arriving on the scene, along with undoubtedly the messengers that were sent to bring him. And he rushes out to meet him. Now, there's a certain reality about kings, and even to the same point, even dignitaries of today. Usually it's the one who goes to meet is the one of lesser degree, if you follow with me. In other words, if you're of great importance, people come to you. You don't go to them. And here we have a king rushing out to someone else. And almost by that action, there is perhaps a couple of things. One, an establishment of honor, as was promised to him. Hey, you come and curse, I will give you all the honor that is due you. And so certainly by his going to Balaam as he arrives on scene is a response of already giving honor. For a king to come out and meet is a pretty spectacular event. In fact, as we look there at verse 36, he comes out to the very border of his territory. In fact, it's almost as if as Balaam makes his way and crosses in, if we can make Illinois the border, as he crosses the state line into Illinois, here the governor is waiting for them. And that's literally what is happening here. The king is at his border waiting for Balaam to arrive. And certainly is showing great honor. It probably could also as well, admittedly, be of great urgency as well. Hey, I've got word that you're on your way. We got to get this started here because we are definitely afraid of what the children of Israel will do if they start crossing over into our land before you, hopefully, curse them. And so it certainly could have been some eagerness as well. But there certainly is an eager response. Regardless of how he put it, we have a very eager king going out to meet Balaam. As we looked last week, Balak and the entire nation seem to be quite shaken. They are scared. They are frightened. They are uncertain. They have as their only means. Can you imagine this? Having an entire nation, having their only solution being found in one man? That's quite an amazing reality. Our nation, even though we have a government that's established with the president obviously at the top, our nation as a whole is never dependent upon one person. And nor should it probably ever be dependent upon just one person. And yet here this entire nation is dependent upon one. And that one has arrived. Put it in kind of a puppy terms. A couple of times that our daughters have gone to camp. When we've gone to pick them up, we bring our goofy dog with us. One, because that goofy dog has been missing his Rebecca all week. And second, we assume that Rebecca probably won't mind seeing her goofy dog as well. That crazy pup, he's got if you look at his face, he's got some serious, I don't know, glaucoma or what his deal is, and he occasionally will run into walls. And so he's number one, probably not the brightest dog, and number two, I don't know that he sees all that well. But it's amazing how at camp, when we go to pick up the girls, that he can spot Becca, even in a group of people, he can spot Rebecca hundreds of yards away and immediately start lurching. You know, he's on a leash, but he's like he really thinks he's going to move us. He's 14 pounds. But on his leash, he's just like, there's dirt coming up underneath his paws because he's determined to get to the Becca that he's been waiting for. And it's always kind of funny as we let loose of the leash, knowing that he has now spotted her, and that dog's only going to go one spot. There could be squirrels, there could be deer, there could be thousands of kids. That dog has got tunnel vision on Rebecca, and that's all he sees. Similar terms, whenever my kids have to go over to my parents' house across the street, all we have to say to Patches is, "Do you want to go to Grandma's?" He's immediately alert, and his ears are straight up, and he starts pouncing in our house, and he's ready to go. Mostly because my mom gives him treats every time he comes over, and so he will repeatedly go over to their house as many times as he's allowed to even get more treats, as my mom seems to bribe the poor little dog in that regard. But I kid you not, we're literally across the road. There's just a dead-end road, so there's not always very much traffic. But we have to open up the door just enough to squeak out and kind of hold them back with our foot as we get out of the door. We look both ways and make sure there's no cars coming. And our road, because it is a dead end, we can see from end to end and kind of pick up that whether or not there's a car going to be coming. And if all is clear, we open up the door, and literally that dog is like at the races. He is just, ears are back, and he is a full charge. There could be a semi coming down our road, and he would not see it. It's just full charge. And what is also hilarious, if you really want to know the inside details, we have trained our dog that he cannot go into Grandma's house unless he's gone potty first. So that crazy dog will literally go flying into the yard and kind of do a leg lift as he's still running to get to that door and wait for his treat. We know there are times when our eagerness for what we want, what we think we need, what we hope to have, what we think is the solution of all of our problems, our over-eagerness, our overly eager attitudes and hearts, and so we say tunnel vision at times, will often get us to a place where we are out of order with our God. Psalms 37:34 says, "Wait on the Lord, and keep his way, and he shall exalt thee to inherit the land. When the wicked are cut off, thou shalt see it." Now, obviously, that's more perhaps mentioning to the children of Israel in the Old Testament time frame, but there is still a significant application for us today. The whole aspect of waiting on the Lord is something that we need to still be living out today. It reminds us, though, that waiting on the Lord, though, requires us to continue to keep his ways. Waiting on the Lord does not mean, time out, I'm just going to sit here and wait. Waiting on the Lord does not mean, in response of an eager response, I'm going to wait on my God. That does not mean that I sit and twiddle my thumbs and sit on the couch and watch television until the Lord leads us otherwise. Waiting on the Lord, as Psalms 37:34 reminds us, is we're to wait on the Lord, but we're to continue to keep his ways. What we do know that the Lord has for us, we need to keep on doing as we wait on our God's direction in our life for that next decision. And in so doing, then he shall exalt us to inherit the land. Obviously, that's more their time frame, more their circumstance than ours. One theologian said it this way: waiting on God is a right line, or we could say it this way, a straight line from one point to another. The first point is the heart of man. The second point is our God. Waiting on the Lord means that we are going to have our puppy dog tunnel vision. Regardless of what happens, we are going to be tunnel visioned on our God. And we're going to continue moving in that regard. King Balak here in this verse seems to have a tunnel vision on Balaam. Perhaps because he's trying to give him the honor that has been promised him. But I believe perhaps even of a greater extent, this man and the entire nation are fearing for their lives, and they have elevated Balaam to the point of he is the answer. He is the only answer. And King Balak rushes out with tunnel vision, seemingly, to this man whom he hopes is going to be the answer for their nation's security. But how often when our focus is on the wrong thing and we get that tunnel vision and like our dog, we run for only the one thing we can see. If that one thing that we're running for is not our God, we are running out of order. We are running away from his order. And may we be reminded of that. But not only that, but as we continue on in verse 37, How do we avoid disorderly, being out of God's order, we could say? We need to avoid that overly eager response, unless it is with eyes focused on our God. So a lot of times that I think we are too slow in pursuing our God, but there's a lot of times I think we are too fast in pursuing our wants, while we've removed our focus from our God and put it on something else. Stay in order. Stay in the right order. But verse 37, and Balak said unto Balaam, did I not earnestly send unto thee to call thee? Wherefore camest thou not unto me? Am I not able to indeed to promote thee to honor? Not only do we need to be watching our eager responses, more so we could say the focus of our eager response, but we also need to be watching our proud response. No, I've given this, let me first say, there's an unwritten law in the Army. An order that can be misunderstood will be misunderstood. Another illustration I know I've read before, somewhat alarming, disturbing perhaps, but just kind of humorously, in a way, depicts how often we misunderstand things. Remember the illustration of Reverend A.J. Jones? Advertisement in the daily newspaper read on Monday, Reverend A.J. Jones has one color TV set for sale. Telephone 626-1313 after 7 p.m. and ask for Mrs. Donnelly, who lives with him, cheap. On Tuesday, an advertisement attempted to correct the wording. We regret the embarrassment caused to Reverend Jones by a typographical error in yesterday's paper. The ad should have read, the Reverend A.J. Jones has one color TV set for sale, cheap. Telephone 626-1313 and ask for Mrs. Donnelly, who lives with him after 7 p.m. On Wednesday, again, another correction was needed. The Reverend A.J. Jones informed us that he has received several annoying telephone calls because of an incorrect ad in yesterday's paper. It should have read, the Reverend A.J. Jones has one color TV set for sale, cheap. Telephone 626-1313 after 7 p.m. and ask for Mrs. Donnelly, who lives with him. On Thursday, the paper read, please make notice that I, the Reverend A.J. Jones, have no color TV set for sale. I have smashed it. Don't call 626-1313 anymore. I have not been carrying on with Mrs. Donnelly. She was until yesterday my housekeeper. And on Friday, the ad read, housekeeper wanted, good pay. Contact Reverend A.J. Jones. 626-1313. Now, how often, whether it be intentional or unintentional, or whether it be implied or specifically applied, we have oftentimes a wrong response to what is going on. I've shared this before as well, but many years ago, probably a good decade ago, Josiah was a baby, so a little less than a decade ago, the fire department here in town bought this little yard ornament. It's like a 3-foot high fireman standing by a hydrant, right? And when we bought it, it was painted. It was painted quite nicely. I believe that the fireman was wearing a red coat, which actually never happens. I don't know that any firemen ever wear red coats, but it just seems the way the cartoons always have it. So this fireman had a red coat, and I think the fire hydrant might have been yellow right next to him, if I had that correct. And it was all painted. It was very nice, but it wasn't a good bond. The paint wasn't bonded correctly. I don't know if there was the right it's concrete, so I don't know how you get paint to stay on concrete indefinitely. But nonetheless, the lady across the street, just right down the road a little smidge, actually called 911 because as it would rain, the paint was disappearing, and that bright, fresh painted yard ornament was now turning into a gray, concrete-looking thing. She called 911 to report that someone was stealing the paint. Now, this lady had obviously some mental issues, and that was well known, and I'm certain that the 911 dispatch was well aware of that as well when she called. But isn't it amazing how often our own interpretation of events may often be quite misleading? There's nobody stealing the paint off of that. Well, how would you and why would you steal the paint off of a yard ornament? It was just the rain, it was the weather, it was the sun. It was a number of factors. It was the environmental aspects of it that obviously the paint is starting to fall off of this concrete little thing going on, and certainly not worthy of a 911 call to the sheriff's department. verse 37, in verse 36, we have Balak, I should say, I was correct the first time. Verse 37, Balak says to Balaam, kind of in his own interpretation, why didn't you come? His interpretation, his conclusion was, did you not come because you didn't think I could give you all that I promised to give you? Was your delay in that you didn't come the first time you were asked simply because you didn't think I could do what I said I was going to do? That certainly is not, that's obviously his pride. That's not the scenario at all. It was truly, as we had last week, it was God that said, don't go with them. It was God that kept him from coming. It was not the king's inability to follow through with his promise. But yeah, what was his conclusion? Did you not know, perhaps as he's flashing his fancy rings and jewelry, perhaps as he's in his very ornamental robe, did you not think that I, the king, could not do unto you all the things that I had promised unto you? Because in the king's mind, that could be the only reason why he would not have come. Had he fully understood what could be in store for him as a reward, the king could see no reason why Balaam would not have already been there to do his bidding. And there could only be one reason. And ultimately it was a pride. It was a proud response. Do we not also find ourselves sometimes doubting our God's ability to follow through with what he has said in our own pride, in our own, can I use the word ignorance, in our own assumptions, in our own conclusions? God has said this, but I'm not sure that it will work. God has said this, he has promised this, but I'm not sure that I am sensing this. He's promised never to leave us, but there are times that I feel like I'm alone. And we begin to doubt our God. He promises to provide for us when we seek him first, but we still seem to have needs. He promises eternal security, but our adversary still convinces us to doubt our eternity. There are times probably in all of our hearts and our lives where we have, in the reality of pride, concluded differently than what God is actually doing. We're not equating God to King Balak here by any means, but in the same way, sometimes our conclusions find us in the same realm that we are doubting our God. We are doubting whether or not he will do. And because of our own pride, we are doubting that God will accomplish what God said he would accomplish. That wasn't Balaam's response here. That wasn't what his reasoning was, but that was the assumed reasoning from the king. How often it is the reality of our reasoning in our hearts and our lives. James chapter 4, first 7 verses says this, for whence come wars and fightings among you? Come they not hence even of your lusts that war in your members? You lust and ye have not. Ye kill and desire to have and cannot obtain. Ye fight and war, yet ye have not, because ye ask not. Ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lust. Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. Do you think that the scripture saith in vain, the spirit that dwelleth in us lusteth to envy? But, if we stop right there, the end of that question, at the end of that sentence, the end of that verse, we'd be left with the very reality, then what hope do we have? There's this battle going on within us, and this battle within us is causing problems around us, and all the problems that are around us, ultimately what James seems to be saying in the first several verses, the problems that surround us are because of the problem that's going on within us. And if we just left it there, boy, we have what a fatalistic outlook of life. We have no hope. My struggles of life are because of the battle is going on within me. That battle within me is causing me to lust at things that I shouldn't have, and it's causing strife around me, and there's no end to this. But James continues, but he giveth more grace. Wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. Submit yourselves therefore to God. Here's the answer. How do we get that grace? How do we accomplish this? Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. How do we stop the battle that goes on from within us? Well, honestly, that doesn't happen until our death. But how can we calm it? How can we silence it? How can we get it into control? Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you, so that he will give more grace. Wherefore it says, God resists the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. A lot of times I think we, in our own minds, excuse ourselves. Who, me? Nope, never, can't, won't, no can do. We can't do this. But do you think the scriptures say in vain that there's a battle going on within us? Do you think the Bible says in error that it mentions a spiritual battle going on within our hearts? Do you think that there's something wrong in that conclusion, and the reality of so many of our wars and fights and battles and issues that we face in the workplace, in our homes, in our marriages, so on and so forth, aren't because they started here in our hearts? The battle's going on, but yet so often we have the mentality, I fear, that it's, well, that doesn't apply to me, that won't work, I'll never do that, I'll never have that. We have a proud response. How do we get out of the order? How do we get out of God's order? We kind of follow the order of Balak here and assume, we conclude, we interpret wrongly that this is all about me. This is about me. This is about what I can do or can't do. And we forgot, again, like point number 1, a focus on our God. I love the very next verse, as Balaam makes it very clear. Balaam said unto Balak, Lo, I am come unto thee, have I now any power at all to say anything? The word that God putteth in my mouth, that shall I speak. Balaam says, hey, I'm not here for your reward. I'm not here for what you think I'm here for. I didn't finally come because I convinced myself that you will follow through with what you've promised. That's not what it's all about at all. Now, it's in very general terms. Again, we don't know much about Balaam in this regard to this point. It's in very general terminology in this regard. He's not saying that he won't curse or that he will curse, but he's saying that, hey, I'm not on your bidding, I'm on God's bidding. And what a reminder that is for our hearts as well. A eager response, try to avoid that unless it's on with a focus toward God. A proud response, always avoid that. Remind ourselves that God gives grace to the humble. And then lastly, we continue on verse 39. How often has this happened in our hearts, before I click the next point? Have you ever been around someone who perhaps is living or speaking in such a way that obviously is contrary to Christianity, if we can say it that way in loose terms? And then they realize that you are a Christian. They realize that you go to church. They realize that you have a regard for God. And almost instantaneously, there's a whole change of attitude. I as a pastor, I know that happens a lot for me. But I know it's because I have the title of a pastor. I was thinking not that long ago, I was meeting with somebody in regards to insurance. And it wasn't even a customer. It was a salesman of sorts. And this guy was one of those guys that he can't complete a sentence without some sort of unnecessary word. And so he's just cursing up a storm. He's not mad. That's just how he was talking. And he was asking about me, and we were finding out about each other. And where are you from? Toulon? Are you from here? I'm actually originally from the Chicago area. Well, the next question obviously always follows when you tell someone you're from the Chicago area. What brought you from Chicago to Toulon? And so my response is, oh, well, I'm a pastor here in town. This guy, I kid you not, turned pale white. And then took a breath, and then started to talk about his own church and how important religion was to him. And from that point on, never said another foul word. And I thought to myself, why the change? why did that suddenly happen just like literally, not even overnight? That was instantaneous. That was, here you were swearing like a sailor, as if sailors always swear, but the proverbial statement. You can't even say a single sentence without cursing. And then now suddenly we're talking about how great our God is because you found out I'm a pastor. How did your life suddenly change from that very statement of why I'm here in Toulon? How often we have, unfortunately at times, and I think I'm speaking for all of us, myself included, how often our own righteousness comes the light in order for us to get what we think we want, in order for us to accomplish what we think we need to accomplish. In other words, let me say it this way. If we say the right things and pretend at least to do the right things, somehow we believe that God is going to look on it lightly and we'll get what we want. And you can really do that about anything. You know, you could easily, I know growing up in junior high, in fact, go back to junior high days, the guys in my class were all about cars and learning about cars, and when we have a break, it was all about what's. Did you hear about the new Porsche 944? You know what kind of engine it's got? I don't know. Well, it's got this kind of engine. It's got this so many valves, and it can do 0 to 60 and so many, whatever. And so you're just bouncing all these facts that really meant nothing, because here we're all in eighth. We can't even drive, but we're talking about Porsches and Lamborghinis and Ferraris, and every break there was something else going on. And I took a liking to the Porsche Carrera. I don't even know if they still make that anymore. Kind of looked like a Volkswagen, but it was a Porsche, or a Porsche. And so I kind of, and whenever I would see it in the Chicago area, there's quite a few of them out and about, especially back then. I'm certain so now today. And I would see them, and there it is. And there's still times today that we'll be driving, and I'll say, hey, there's a 911 Carrera, or a 944, or I'll be able to point it out and acknowledge it. Only the older ones, because I don't know the newer ones. And certainly as we consider how often it is for junior higher, you've got to fit in. You got to talk the talk. You got to talk cubic inches, and you got to talk horsepower, and you got to talk how fast we can go from 0 to 60, and you got to talk about transmission differentials and how it works out. Things that I'm certain not a single one of us even knew what it meant. But we read it in the catalog, so now we've got to tell everybody else that we got this all figured out. It's kind of the quiz. Hey, do you know what kind of transmission the Porsche 911 has? I do. I don't know what that means. I don't know what it is, but we do the same thing in our spiritual lives. Sometimes we can spiritualize about anything, and in so doing, we almost expect that because we have figured out how to spiritualize it, we can make it right in the eyes of God. If you follow with me. I've heard that spiritualization from a whole host of things that many times almost verged on the slight line of you're kind of almost getting into the immoral part of things, but you're trying to spiritualize it to the point of this is okay. Justifying what we are doing because, well, I'm saying the right words, and I'm trying to make it sound like this is all going to work out right. Well, we have a righteous response taking place here in verse 39. And Balaam went with Balak, and they came on to, okay, there it is. I have the pronunciation for me, so if you want to know how it literally should be, it should be Kiryath Kutso, I believe is how you'd say that in the Hebrew. But as I've already stated, it literally means the city of streets. We can say it this way. Balak has taken Balaam to the city of Chicago, the big city. He's taken him perhaps even to the capital city. He's taken him to a place of great population, a place of many streets. Kind of showing them the best of the best. And then look at verse 40. And Balak offered oxen and sheep and sent to Balaam and the princes that were with him. Verse 40 is disputed. Are we talking about sacrifices to gods? Talking about sacrifice to the God? Or are we just talking about a sacrifice for a feast? Remember when Abraham has visits, he goes out and he slaughters and he offers to those that have visited him. It could be that same way here. All we know is that Balak offered oxen and sheep and sent the Balaam and to the princes that were with him. The Ryrie Study Bible, his note on this verse says something along the lines of he sent the liver of the animals, which would be used in a kind of a carnal worship to the gods, to Balaam and the princes that were with him. And it came to pass on the morrow that Balak took Balaam and brought him up into the high places of Baal, that thence he might see the uttermost or the utmost part of the people. Baal was certainly, I've said this before, Baal in the Old Testament time, Baal was a word that basically meant the high God, the supreme God. And every location would have a different Baal. If you were in an agricultural area, your Baal may be the god of agriculture, or the god of sun, or the god of rain, whatever was necessary for that area, for their agricultural means. And so that became their chief god. Another god may have the god, if you're in a fishing community, it would be the god of the seas was their Baal. And so Baal was pretty much the supreme god of those people there in their polytheism of that day. And so he's taking them to their Baal, whatever that Baal meant to them, taking them to their high places. Now, as a side point, the high places in those days would obviously been high places. They would have been nice places. It would have been we could almost say it this way, the best places. Here in kind of a deserty, mountainous region, it would be up there in those plateaus. I forget the town now that they had already traveled through right after leaving Egypt. Remember where they found those palm trees and water? It'd be like that place would be the high places, and they'd build an altar in those kinds of places so that it would encourage people to go and rest and worship the gods. And so as Balak is taking Balaam on this tour of the high places, of all the places of worship that surround them, for number one, I'm certain because they were spectacular places to see, I'm certain. Number two, because many times it included water and shade, which many times was not always in abundance in that time frame and in that era, in that area. But number three, as well, as we conclude here in verse 41, it gave them a look out over the army of ants of the children of Israel that lied just over there. So they would have different views as they made their way from place to place. I didn't hit point 3 yet. And so we almost have Balak doing his own version of a righteous response. If I do the right things, if I take him to the right places, if I show him all these high places, basically places of worship for Baal, but they're pretty spectacular, I've got to probably admit. They're pretty nice places, but nice places that were used in very wrong ways. But if I take them to all these places that have been established as ideal locations of worship, maybe I will be able to get him to convince him to not only see this, but to see them and get what I want. And I'm not going to point fingers at myself or to any of us and say how often we are like Balak. But the temptation is always there. If I can just say these things, if I can just do these things. Remember James chapter 4. So many times we don't have, even though we've asked, because we've asked amiss. Why? We've asked to consume it upon our lusts. If we can spiritualize even our lusts, we somehow believe that God is going to follow through. It's completely contrary to what God has for us, completely contrary for his plan for us, completely contrary for his will for us. But if I can ask my lust and put them into spiritual terms, we almost feel like God should be obliged to meet those needs that I have because I've done my best to make it righteous. Balak is doing exactly that here. Balaam, come see our places of worship. Come see our established places of beauty, of rest, of water, of refreshment, of worship. So that you can do my bidding tomorrow. Well, we need to avoid this orderly thinking, this orderly mannerisms in our life, and avoid those eager responses. We need to avoid those proud responses when we conclude in the wrong ways. We also need to avoid those righteous responses. And obviously the righteous is in quotations there. Our own righteousness, our own attempt at righteousness. Just because we put the name Christian on it doesn't make it Christian. Just because we use the name of Christ doesn't mean it's in accordance with Christ. Just because we can convince ourselves, and maybe even others, that we can make this desire, make this want, make this need a spiritual need, it all works out. Kind of in a funny way. You know how easy this is? You know how easy it is in sharing prayer requests to be gossip? We know it's not. You're not supposed to gossip, right? We all know that. You shouldn't gossip. But you know how easy it is to spiritualize gossip by simply sharing it as a prayer request? I say that humorously, but we understand that, right? And there are times that I'm not saying we shouldn't share requests, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't be in prayer for those that are going through great things. But I know there's a lot of times that gossip is spiritualized in the form of a prayer request, and we think it's okay. And there's a whole host of other examples of that. Let's avoid trying to spiritualize everything to get what we want. Let's avoid trying to make everything righteous. Make it right with God. Make it, if I say the right jargon, God will be pleased and he will follow through. That's not God's order. That's not how this works. I would hope that each one of us, if we were taken up to the high places of Baal, we'd say, no, this is not helping. This is not what's going to bring about the results that we're looking for. But yet how often we do that in our lives today. Let's pray. Dear Lord, we thank you again for your word. We thank you for these verses. And although in much of the case, those were just narration of events that were transpiring, I pray that in those few verses we be able to see an application for our hearts in the area of order, of following your order, and how often we find ourselves in chaos, how often we find ourselves in confusion, simply because we've jumped to our own order instead of yours. We've jumped to our own conclusions instead of yours. We've jumped to our own wants and wills instead of yours. And I pray that you challenge us in that regard as we follow after you. And we thank you for what you will do. In Jesus' name, amen.